When you're starting developing applications, you usually have to make a decision between Android and iOS. And also, you need to decide if you're doing desktop applications, are you going to do a Windows app? Are you going to do a Mac OS app? For the web, you also need to decide what kind of platform you're going to use for web. What are you going to do there? And there was so many decisions that you had to make basically if you are deciding to build software a few years ago. And in reality, the best situation for a business is that they have all these applications at the same time. That you have an Android app and you can capture those customers. You have an iOS app and you can capture those customers. You have a web app, you can capture those customers. If you need desktop as well, that would be the ideal situation. But for the longest time, because of the fragmentation of the ecosystem, between Android, iOS, and all these different things, how businesses have been set up and how startups have been set up is they had different teams performing different duties. So you had to have, if you had an Android developer, you also had to hire an iOS team. You also had to have an Android team. You also, if you wanted a desktop app, you'd also need to have a team for that. And you can imagine the scale and how limiting it would have been for a business to try and reach all these customers at the same time back then. And some solutions were developing. People were not taking them very seriously because the performance was very bad. And they basically didn't match up to the marketing. And they would give your users not the best user experience at the same time. But that has all changed in the last couple of years. And we have a new contender on the in the ring basically. And that's called Flutter. It's quite mind blowing and it's extremely exciting about the future because all the challenges I've just spoken about, the challenge of having to have multiple teams, and you can imagine all those are people you have to pay. So the cost can really balloon if you wanted to build an application. It could really balloon if you wanted to have your app on all these platforms. Now, Flutter is a platform that allows you, it's an open source SDK for cross platform app development. And what that means is you can use a single code base to develop Android, iOS, desktop, web, and even games. You can use a single code base to do all of that work. You can write your application once and it's going to run on all these platforms without you having to have to go through basically all that effort and to burn through all that money and to hire all those people. And what this means for a startup and how this changes business is that if you're starting a startup in 2022 and this startup you need a web app, you need an Android app, you need an iOS app, you basically don't have a choice that is better than Flutter. If you choose anything else, I feel like you are, unless your thing is very like custom, it's very technical or you need it to be a very specific way. But if you're making something like Uber, if you're making something like Pinterest, you can achieve any kind of use case you would desire using Flutter. And that's something I've personally had experience with. I've tested it out, I've done it for myself. To me, it's the only platform where you can say, like, at a high performance level, you can actually write once and it will run anywhere. So you have one single code base, one single even suite of unit tests. So you don't need to have testing across all your different platforms. And it also means for the business that you only have one team. You only have one team, and you only need to have a company that uses one programming language. Okay, I don't. That's for the front end. You can for the back end, you can still use things like Node.js. So you can do whatever you want in the back end. But for the front end, you eliminate basically all these other teams. You eliminate your Android, you eliminate your iOS, and you eliminate your web team, and they all become one single Flutter team. Now, if you have people who are specifically working on Flutter Web, they can also be the same developers working on Flutter Mobile. And it can just be a thing of now you internally separating the teams according to the kind of layout that you want. And that's how I think it's going to happen. So teams are now going to start focusing on, instead of different types of platforms, they're going to focus on different kinds of screens. That's how the companies are going to be split up. So you'll have a team working on desktop UI, tablet UI, and mobile UI. Probably that's one way it might go. So it's extremely popular, and a lot of developers are waking up to this beauty of Flutter, and they're starting to figure out that Flutter is important.